Hi, I'm Phil Heywood, and this presentation summarises my journey into leadership, a journey which has been accelerated by the Nye Bevan programme. This summary of my learning is underpinned by a full document which I've called My Journey into Leadership, the Learning and the Evidence, and this document is available to members of the Academy and colleagues in my self-managed learning set on the virtual campus. There are some key messages that I want to share with you through this presentation because they're the nuggets of learning which I will be taking away from the programme. The first of these is about the bike and the journey. The second is about ambiguity and the weather. The third is about the importance of why. And finally, I'd like to give you and share with you some examples of impact. I'm going to begin with me and my bike, and here we are on Tower Bridge. I'm starting here because one of my learning goals was to be healthy and focused, and I developed this objective because I knew that to perform better I needed to take care of myself and be fitter and get into the habit of regular exercise. So I created an incentive against this objective by signing up for the London Night Rider. The Night Rider is a 62-mile bike ride around the landmarks of London. So this is how I came to be cycling across Tower Bridge on Sunday the 8th of June. But this bike ride turned out to be about so much more than a practical challenge, and it taught me a lot. Firstly, there were times that I thought I'd bitten off more than I could chew, but then the realisation dawned that it was my self-taught and random approach to training that wasn't paying off. So I did some research on the internet and found out about training regimes, and then I built one of my own, and then I stuck to it, and then I practiced. And the outcome was that once I put in the effort to structured training, about 2 weeks before the event, my doubts began to melt away because I reached the point that I knew I was capable of completing the event. My learning was that if you get some perspective by learning from others, and you do some planning, and you then put that planning into practice, that you can be confident about performance, and that's a very powerful message. The second thing I learnt was that I was at risk of confusing the means with the end. Partway through my training, I realised that I'd begun to mistake the 62-mile bike ride as the objective, as the thing I had to achieve. But then I began to enjoy the training I was doing. I enjoyed the time out on the bike. I enjoyed knowing that I was fitter and healthier and performing better. And I began to ask myself, what next? And the answer was strikingly simple. I just needed to keep on going. And all of a sudden I realised that I'd started to think of what I started to think of as an end point was actually just a milestone, and that the end of the bike ride was going to be the start of something new. So my bike had taught me that with perspective, planning and practice I could push boundaries and achieve higher levels of performance, but it's also taught me that the journey goes on and that the trick is to take learning with you from one stage of the journey to the next. Having realised this, it also occurred to me that the same applies to the whole Bevan experience. I'd started the programme with a linear view and my sights doggedly fixed on graduation. But now I can see that it doesn't stop here. This programme has enabled me to learn new skills and test aspects of my leadership practice, but the most important lesson is the knowledge about what it will take to sustain me on the next stage of my journey. So here I'm thinking about change, ambiguity and chaos. They're all around us all the time. And it's probably fair to say that the Bevan experience has been a microcosm of this. Now, several years ago I was at a leadership event where a chief constable was talking about what leadership meant to him, and he shared a personal story. He had been the officer on the scene of a high-profile incident in London where police marksmen were deployed. He was on the roof of a building overlooking the scene with the leader of the firearms unit. The weather wasn't good. There was persistent and steady rain falling and obscuring their vision. The chief constable cursed the weather and complained how difficult it made the job. The leader of the marksman's unit just looked at him and said, "The weather is." His clear message was that in their particular context, the weather was a given, and it was a factor over which they had no influence. All they could do was treat it as a constant, take account of it, and get on. When I wrote up my opening statement, I recalled the poem Invictus by William Henley, which ends with the line, "I am the captain of my soul." I included this in my opening statement because at the time it seemed to me that I was being buffeted around by the winds of change, and I felt a very, very long way away from being the captain of my soul. However, I've come to realise during the course of the Bevan programme that marksman was right. The weather is. There will always be ambiguity, change and chaos in the world of health and social care, and taken together, the closing line of the poem, the story of the marksman, and my experience of being able to ride around London have enabled me to learn that how I weather the winds of change is down to me. I can now see that William Henley was right. I truly am the captain of my soul. I know that I'll be buffeted by turbulent times, but there probably isn't a captain in history who proved their mettle by navigating calm waters. It's in the rough weather that we all show our calibre and demonstrate our leadership by making sense of change, ambiguity and chaos for those around us. So this means the next question has to be, if I'm the only person who can do this for me, how am I going to do it? And so we come to the importance of why. The approach taken by Simon Sinek has made a big impression on me. He describes a golden circle of communication in which he says we should start with why. And it seems to me that there are big parallels here between why and ambition. Why am I here? Why am I who I am? Why do I drive myself on? And why haven't I always stood up for the things in which I believe? So during the course of the Bevan programme, I've taken the opportunity to experiment with ideas and thoughts about this because I knew it was something I needed to get right for myself and get right for the future. And this is because for me, it's about becoming the leader that I want to be. And the premise I've developed is that there are 4 elements to becoming the leader I want to be. The first of those is about origins. Now, origins are the root of everything, and this is partly about my past and how I came to be where I am, but it's mainly about staying true to the things I believe in, because those are the things which drive my passions and provide an anchor for the way I think and act. There are personal beliefs in here about the absolute integrity of the individual. There's elements of Carl Jung's exposition of self-actualization, and also a profound attachment to the principles of the NHS Constitution, which I believe should underpin the delivery of our health and social care services. People like Harry Smith and Alan Johnson have written powerful accounts recently of the era before the NHS and the welfare state. And today, when the red top press, amongst others, are prone to use the welfare state as a derogatory term, I think we should be proud of what we have in our welfare systems and the protection they afford to people who need care and support. These are precious institutions and they're precious ideals. Next for me comes ambition itself. And the question here is, what do I want to do? What do I want to be? And I've realised that my motivation is quite simply to be here and be present for the people I love and the people I work with, so that I can engage authentically with them, be present with them and help them address the issues that they're facing. Next, I thought about focus. Now, focus is necessary. It's certainly necessary for me because I know that I'm easily distracted, and I need to be able to remind myself about the priorities and what needs to be done and what the milestones to delivery look like. Without this focus, I know it will be all too easy for me to get blown off course by the winds of change. And finally, there's pace. There is so much to do and time is so precious that it's tempting to treat everything as a sprint, but this is fatal. I've done it so many times myself in the past. I've done it at home, I've done it on my bike, and I've done it at work. We have to see the endeavour in which we're engaged as a marathon and pace our input so that we can stay in the race and get to the right long-term result. And I believe that these 4 elements come together to help me plot a course towards becoming the leader that I want to be. So, now that I've started to apply this thinking, what difference has it made for the people who use the services we offer? What difference has it made for staff? And what's the impact within the organisation? Well, let's begin by thinking about Mrs. Smith. And I've started with Mrs. Smith, and I use that expression because we do seem to struggle for a generic description of the people who use the services we deliver. Patients seems paternalistic and doesn't fit with the pluralistic world of integrated health and social care services. Service users seems pejorative, and customers doesn't quite seem right either. For some time now, the trust with which I work has used the expression Mrs. Smith to make the point that the services we provide impact on individual people, and this has become part of the lexicon of the organisation in a way which has real meaning for staff and conveys the importance of being person-centred. However, I don't believe that we involve Mrs. Smith sufficiently in the way that we plan and develop our services, and this is something that I'm working to rectify. We've just run a proof of concept pilot to test the impact of undertaking some of our assessment work over the telephone. This evaluation is underway now and includes taking feedback directly from people who've had the experience of having their assessment undertaken over the telephone. This is better, and it's okay as far as it goes. It's an improvement on the past, but it's still after the event, and such involvement is therefore post hoc, and I don't believe it's good enough. So we're about to embark on a significant reshaping of our care model, and in preparation for this, I've asked 2 of my team members to develop knowledge and capacity in experience-based co-design so that this time round we can engage people right from the start of the process in designing how we work as well as evaluating it after the event. And we're aiming to extend the approach by using volunteers and service users to undertake some of the interviews which are vital to the experience-based co-design process. Now, if we think about our staff, I think one of the big differences here that I now have the courage and the confidence to share more of myself and more of my stories with people when it's appropriate. This might be one-to-one, in small groups, or presentations at seminars and workshops. An example of this is that at a recent health forum, which was held for staff in our trust, I told the story of how I found out that I'd had high blood pressure at a similar event about 10 years ago. I'd no idea I had the condition at the time, and it's since been very successfully treated, and my blood pressure is well controlled, and there's no risk of me having long-term health problems. The feedback from participants was that my story encouraged the majority of the 60+ people there to get their own blood pressure checked and sign up for Wellman checks. For the organisation, the difference is that I'm now more engaged. I find myself standing up for what I believe is right and escalating concerns more readily than I once did. If I'm honest, I got to the stage of feeling, why bother? And this was partly down to me, and it was partly a cultural reluctance in the organisation to listen or hear. Now, I take the courage, though, from my own convictions, and I'm happy to champion and escalate issues which I believe need to be heard. I do this now because I've the confidence to know that if I'm feeling something is not quite right, then it probably isn't. I don't get it right all the time, but there's a saying that to a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. I've learned to spot when I'm at risk of behaving like a hammer, and interestingly, that's usually when I just keep banging on about a particular issue. Previously, when I found myself in this situation, I would have either just stopped, or I'd have carried on hammering away, probably even more furiously, but without making an impression. Now, I take time to pause and think about why the message might not be getting across, and think about what I could do differently to find another way to break the deadlock or highlight an issue. In short, the difference is that the approach I take to the challenges I face makes a difference to how I'm perceived. In drawing this presentation to a close, I'd like to summarise the 3 things that I will take with me from this programme into the future. The first is my own understanding of what it has taken for me to become a leader. This is something which I find inspiring and gives me the confidence and the courage to know what needs to be done. The second thing is the vital importance of networks and relationships in enabling me to retain the right perspective and think around issues to find new solutions. I now know that if ever I'm feeling stuck or unsure about an issue, support and advice is only an email, a tweet, a text or a phone call away. And the final thing is the realisation that I'm on a journey, and that bikes are like leadership, because both have the power to take you forward on a journey, and journeys are not only exciting, but they're enriching as well. Thank you very much for taking the time to view my presentation.